Hello there, my name is Will Patillo, and welcome to the fifth part in my series on understanding polymorphism. This video focus is going to be on scriptable objects. So in the last video, we were using a Unity component pattern to separate some of the programming from the design by just simply attaching the various movement and speaking behaviors to each of our animals here. One weakness of this system that we have so far is that although the designer can control what behaviors each animal has, such as, if I want to give the dog the ability to meow, I can attach a component. However, the designer does not have access to what it means to bark or to walk. They can go into the script and actually change it. Say if walking was going to be that, but that's still getting into the code. And in this case, this kind of trivial example, that's not a big deal, but it'd be nice if we could bring this behavior out a little bit further into the inspector and just be able to define out here what each of these does. Now, we could do that in a fairly simple way by just having a serialized field and string statement, and then make this be plus statement, and then for that particular script here, be able to change this to walking, something like that. I don't really like this because then I have to do the same thing for all of them, and I suppose I could get around that by dealing with it on the animal level and passing that in, but we're going to do something that I think is a little bit cleaner. I'm going to leave this one and go into my scriptable objects scene here, and you can see the setup's very similar. I have a player and my various animals. It works the same as before, where I can left click on an animal to get its speaking behavior, and the ones that don't speak, nothing happens. Right click to get my movement behavior, and so on. So let's take a look at how this works, and we'll see how it's different as we go. So the player is pretty much the same. I have various input types. On the mouse button down, I set the input type. I check whether the user's clicked on a character, and then if so, then perform the appropriate movement or speaking action based on what movement type they've set. Now, one thing that's new is this line right here, but we'll get to that later on in this video. So let's take a look next at the character class where all this stuff is happening. And actually, you'll see one difference right here is that now, if I look at the previous scene, my animals had all sorts of components attached to them. Animal, walk, dog paddle, bark, swim, silence, and so on. Whereas in this scene, they all just have the same character script attached, and they have lists for their behaviors with just variables passed in. So let's take a look at this character script here. So here are my lists. They're serialized so that I can assign them in the inspector. Also, because they're lists rather than arrays, we can expand or shrink them as we want, which I'll get to later. And for perform speak, I'll start with this one. Here's kind of the core of it right here. So right here's an int that keeps track of which speaking behavior it'll execute at any given time. So starting out at 0, and I just look at that element in the list and then call the speak method on it. So in the case of the dog, the 0th element is walk, and it will go here. Now, these are all instances of a scriptable object of the move sort. Actually, let's take a look at speak. Here's bark. And there's not much here, just an entry point for a string, because these are all created off of this template, the scriptable object class. So let's take a look at that next. And here this just has a serialized string. That's what generates this field. And it has a method, a speak method, which just outputs the statement, which I've typed in. And there's a also note there's this create asset menu. So what that allows me to do is if I say I want to create a new speaking behavior, say let's call it, so I have a new speaking style, let's say hum, and I want to give the tuna the ability to hum. I can just add that to the speaking style, drag this in, and then for the hum, say la la la, and there we go. Now we have a new speaking behavior. Also, if we wanted to change, say, the cat's behavior to humming, all I have to do is select the cat, drag this hum over, and now instead of meowing, it hums. So let's see that. Bring up the console, right click on the tuna, oh sorry, left click on the tuna, la la la, and same for the cat. I can actually change it back at runtime by just dragging that in, and now the cat is meowing. Alright, so let's, I'm going to get rid of that. That is how speaking works. Moving is very similar. It just calls move and also passes in a GameObject.name, so that's the object associated with this character. So in the case of the cat, it would get this little string right here. For dog, it would be right there. Oh, and another note, these lines right here, this one and this one, this if statement, this is just a little safety check. So if the speaking list, say, has no items in it, or if the current item is empty, then we just skip this line. So in the case of the giraffe, for example, this has no speaking behaviors, the list is 0, so when I click perform speak, this check fails and this method does nothing. Which one nice benefit of that is, if we remember back in this version, and as well as all of the others, I had a silence method, which was just empty. And now that's not necessary anymore. In the movement, this scriptable object works the same way. Create an asset menu so I can make instances of it in the inspector. I have a move statement which I just type in out here and pass in the name of the object from character, and so I have the name plus is move statement. And this, is very simple logic. I could put as much complex stuff as I want inside of here. Now, some of the things this gets me, in addition to the convenience of just being able to drag and drop items in and create new ones without entering any code, I'm also able to change what it means to speak in various ways. So let's say I decided that I don't want the dog to arf when it barks. I would rather that it woofs. All I have to do is change this string right here, and now it says it does that. So I'll change that back. And another advantage of that is if a particular behavior is shared across multiple different characters, I only have to change it in one place and it affects all of them. So let's take, for example, walking. So instead of walking, I say sauntering. And that's what I want walking to look like. All I have to do is change it right here. And now, when I click on anything that walks, dog is sauntering, cat is sauntering, giraffe is sauntering, robot is sauntering, and then these still swim because they're using swim. Yeah, now we see that the designer has much more full control over how things work. From the inspector, they can both determine how many movement and speaking styles they have, what those styles are. They can create new ones. They can change what it means to swim or walk or to fly, all from the inspector. Now let's take a look at some further functionality that's in here. Much of this existed before. So let's say I want to change the movement state, which, remember, in the inputs, let's see, it was space bar changes the movement state, and the T key changes the speaking state. So let's see how that's implemented. When I change move state, all I do is just change this move ID, and then this little check right here is to see if I'm at the end of the list. Then I just cycle back to the beginning. Speaking works the same way. Go to the next one, cycle back to the beginning if you're at the end. So let's take a look at that. So the dog, as you might remember, has two forms of moving, or two forms of moving. That's correct. So dog is walking. Now I press the space bar. Dog is dog paddling. Because you can see it's just switches between these two elements in the list. If I press the space bar again, now it's walking. With the robot here, it has walk and fly. So it's walking, press space bar, and now it's flying. Just because of this bit right here. Now let's say I want to add new behaviors at runtime. In particular, I would like to be able to teach any of these characters how to dance by having my mouse over it and pressing the D key. So here's how I implement that. I look at my player here. I've added a new command. It's D. When I get the D key code, that's where I set this input. Cast array as before. And so anyway, when it's successfully pressed the D key over a character, I have this call character, learn movement, and pass in dance. This is a variable. It's up here. Serialized field, move styles, dance. So if I look on my player, that's what this is about. I've just created a field where I can put in a movement, and I could pass in any movement here. I could teach any of them to fly just by switching it to that. But I'll stick with dance for now. So that gets a reference to this scriptable object instance. And if I go to this F12, look at this learn movement, I receive that new movement. Here's a little check here to make sure the list doesn't already contain that movement, in which case I just skip this. This prevents duplicates right here. And if it's not a duplicate, then I add that to the movement styles list and add a little message saying that it's been added. So let's give that a try. I bring this up. So let's see. Here is my cat. So right now, cat is walking. Actually, let's take a look at this. So I press D, and you can see that dance has been added to this movement styles list, and that cat has learned to dance. I press the space bar, and now cat is dancing. Press space bar again, and it's back to walking. And I can do the same thing for all of these animals. So I can, dog has learned to dance, giraffe, dolphin, tuna, and robot all learn to dance. So walking, dog paddling, dancing, giraffe is dancing, dolphin is dancing, tuna is dancing, and robot is dancing. So this would be a great kind of system if you're working on like an ability system or something like that, where you want to be able to add and remove abilities from various characters, all you have to do is define its type and then just add it to a list. And in this movement styles, you just, in here you define what all of these different elements of this type have in common, and pass in variables for what's different about each instance, and define those unique behaviors in each instance of the scriptable object. And there you go. So as you can see, there's a lot of benefits to this over simply just using components as before. One, as I stated, is it gives a lot more control over to the designer, but also it just simplifies things a lot. We don't have a whole lot of mono behavior scripts anymore. There's the player for getting input, that stayed the same. There's the character, which instead of being an abstract class is just something that applies to everyone. And there's no unique classes anymore. So we've actually completely removed inheritance from this. And I could bring that back if I wanted to, differentiate between animals and robots again. I could use some inheritance here to change how they handle, perform speak, and perform move, and so on. But anyway, I hope that is helpful. Scriptable objects are a really good way to change the architecture of your project to make things a lot more flexible and easy once you have them set up. So that is the end of this video, and if you like this, found it helpful, don't forget to like to make this a little bit more visible to others, and subscribe so that you can see the next video when it comes out. So until next time, this is Will Patillo signing out.